I never imagined my life would take such a dramatic turn. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how my world turned upside down in a matter of months. It all began when I was 20 years old and married Jack, the man I believed was the love of my life. Jack and I met in college. It was love at first sight. He was handsome, intelligent, and had a smile that lit up the entire room. We fell madly in love and, after 2 years of dating, decided to get married. We were young and naive, convinced that our love could overcome any obstacle. The first years of our marriage were like a dream. We lived in a small apartment in downtown Chicago, both working and studying, spending every free moment together. We laughed, made plans for the future, and loved each other with an intensity I thought was indestructible. However, reality began to hit us little by little. Responsibilities increased, money became scarce, and stress accumulated. Jack got a job at an advertising agency that demanded long hours, while I finished my nursing studies and worked part-time at a clinic. Gradually, the distance between us began to grow. Conversations became shorter, romantic dinners less frequent, and arguments about money became increasingly common. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, that all couples went through difficult times. It was then that life dealt us an even harder blow. Jack lost his job. The company he worked for declared bankruptcy, and overnight, we found ourselves with a single source of income and a mountain of debt. The tension in our home became unbearable. Jack fell into a deep depression. He spent entire days on the couch, watching TV and drinking beer. I tried to cheer him up, helped him look for work, but nothing seemed to work. I felt increasingly lonely and frustrated. It was at this moment that Jack mentioned his father, Robert. He had never talked much about him before. I knew they didn't have a good relationship and hadn't seen each other in years. However, in our desperation, Jack suggested asking him for financial help. I remember the day Robert arrived at our door as if it were yesterday. He was a tall man, about 50 years old, with greying hair and eyes incredibly similar to Jack's. His presence filled our small living room, and I could feel the tension in the air as father and son looked at each other after so many years. Robert agreed to help us financially, but with one condition. He wanted to stay with us for a while to supervise how we spent the money. Jack was furious, but we had no other choice. So suddenly, our small apartment became home for 3. Robert's arrival coincided with a stroke of luck for Jack. He got a new job at an advertising agency in a nearby city. The job required him to travel constantly, sometimes for days. On one hand, I was happy for him, as he seemed to be regaining his confidence. On the other hand, I felt even more alone and abandoned. It was during these long absences of Jack's that I began to get to know Robert better. At first, our relationship was tense and formal. But little by little, we started talking more. Robert was a good listener and, surprisingly, gave good advice. I found myself sharing with him my concerns about my marriage, my frustrated dreams, and my fears for the future. One night, while we were having dinner together, Jack was travelling as usual, Robert looked me in the eyes and said, "Emily, you're an extraordinary woman. You deserve to be happy." Those simple words touched something deep inside me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly valued. Days passed, and my relationship with Robert grew closer. I started noticing things about him that I had overlooked before. His sense of humour, his intelligence, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about something he was passionate about. I caught myself looking forward to the moments we spent together. Meanwhile, my relationship with Jack deteriorated further. When he was home, we barely talked. He spent most of his time working on his computer or going out with his new colleagues. I tried to talk to him several times about our problems, but he always found an excuse to avoid the conversation. It was during one of Jack's trips when everything changed. I received a call from an unknown number. It was a woman. Her voice trembled as she asked if I was Jack's wife. My heart sank. I knew what was coming before she said it. The woman, in tears, told me she had been having an affair with Jack for the past 6 months. She said he had promised to leave me, that he had told her our marriage was over. Every word was like a dagger in my heart. I hung up the phone and collapsed on the kitchen floor, sobbing uncontrollably. It was Robert who found me like this. Without saying a word, he hugged me and held me while I cried. At that moment, I felt a connection with him that I had never experienced before. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. I confronted Jack when he returned, and he denied everything at first. But when I showed him the evidence the other woman had sent me, he finally confessed. Seeing his face of guilt and shame gave me no satisfaction. I just felt an immense emptiness. My story is not over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Back to the story. In the midst of all this emotional chaos, Robert was my rock. He listened to me, comforted me, and gave me strength to move forward. Little by little, my feelings towards him began to change. I no longer saw him just as Jack's father or as a friend. I started to see him as a man, one who made me feel alive and valued. One night, while Jack was away on another of his trips, Robert and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie. Suddenly, our eyes met, and without thinking, we kissed. It was a kiss full of pent-up passion, of repressed desire. When we separated, we were both breathless and surprised by what had just happened. "This is wrong," I said, although my body screamed otherwise. "I know," Robert replied, "but I've never felt so alive." From that moment on, our relationship transformed into a passionate affair. We met in secret, stealing moments of intimacy when Jack wasn't around. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I couldn't help it. Robert made me feel desired, appreciated, and loved in a way that Jack hadn't in years. Guilt was eating me up inside. Every time I saw Jack, I felt like I was wearing a sign that screamed, "Unfaithful," on my forehead. But at the same time, I couldn't deny my feelings for Robert. It was as if I had discovered a part of myself that had been asleep for years. Things got even more complicated when Jack, apparently remorseful for his infidelity, began making attempts to reconcile with me. He brought me flowers, invited me to dinner, even suggested we go to couples therapy. But each gesture only made me feel more guilty and confused. One night, after a particularly tense dinner with Jack, I snuck out to meet Robert at a nearby hotel. As we lay in bed, embracing, I confessed all my fears and doubts to him. "I don't know what to do, Robert," I said through tears. "I love Jack, or at least I loved the man he used to be. But what I feel for you, it's something I've never experienced before." Robert looked into my eyes and said, "Emily, I love you. And if you decide to stay with Jack, I'll understand. But I want you to know that I'm willing to give everything for you, even if it means facing my own son." His words moved me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt that someone was putting me first, that someone was willing to fight for me. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Jack kept trying to reconcile, but every time I looked at him, I could only think of his betrayal and my own feelings for Robert. The tension at home was palpable, and I knew that sooner or later everything would explode. And so it did. One night, Jack returned early from a trip and found me talking on the phone with Robert. I don't know exactly what he heard, but it was enough for him to lose control. He started yelling at me, accusing me of being a cheating whore and throwing things around the room. Robert, who was downstairs, heard the commotion and came running up. What followed was a violent confrontation between father and son. Screams, insults, and accusations flew through the air. Jack, blinded by anger, tried to hit me, but Robert intervened, taking the blow in my place. Seeing Robert defending me, risking his relationship with his son for me, was the turning point. At that moment, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't continue in a loveless marriage based on mutual lies and betrayals. With tears in my eyes, I looked at Jack and said, "It's over. I can't go on with this." Jack looked at me, a mixture of anger and pain in his eyes. "Is it because of him?" he asked, pointing at Robert. "Are you leaving me for my own father?" "I'm leaving you because we're no longer happy together," I replied. "Because we've both made mistakes and hurt each other. And yes, I love Robert. But that's not the reason I'm ending our marriage. I'm ending it because it no longer exists." The next few hours were chaos. Jack screamed, cried, begged. Robert tried to calm him down, but only managed to infuriate him more. Finally, I made a drastic decision. I packed some of my things in a suitcase and walked out the door, leaving behind years of my life and a marriage that had crumbled. Robert followed me. We got into his car and drove aimlessly for hours, processing everything that had happened. Finally, we stopped at a small motel on the outskirts of the city. That night, as we lay in the motel bed, Robert took my hand and said, "Emily, I know this isn't easy. I know there's a lot of pain and confusion. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. If you want to try this with me, I'm willing to give it my all. But if you need time and space, I'll understand." His words touched me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt that someone really saw me, valued me, and respected me as a person, not just as a wife or lover. "Robert," I said, "I don't know what the future holds for us, but I know I want to find out with you." The following months weren't easy. I had to face the judgment of friends and family who didn't understand my decision. Jack, hurt and angry, did everything possible to make things difficult for us during the divorce process. There were moments when I doubted my decision, when guilt threatened to consume me. But Robert was by my side every step of the way. He supported me when I had to move and start from scratch. He encouraged me when I got a new job as a nurse in a hospital. He held me when the nights were long and the memories painful. Little by little, we began to build a life together. It wasn't easy. The age difference was sometimes a challenge, and we had to learn to communicate and trust each other in a way that neither of us had experienced before. There were difficult moments, of course. The first time we ran into Jack in public was incredibly awkward. The disapproving looks from some of our acquaintances were hard to ignore, and sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I wondered if I had made the right decision. But then I would look at Robert, see the love in his eyes, feel the warmth of his embrace, and I knew I had found something special, something worth fighting for. Now, years later, I can look back and see how that turbulent period of my life led me to where I am today. Robert and I are still together, stronger than ever. We've learned to face challenges together, to communicate openly, and to value every moment we have. Jack eventually found peace and forgiveness. Although our relationship will never be the same, we've managed to reach a place of mutual respect. He's even begun to rebuild his relationship with Robert, something I never thought possible. Looking back, I realise that my story isn't just about infidelity or betrayal. It's a story about growth, about learning to value oneself, about the courage to pursue happiness even when the path is difficult. I don't regret the decisions I made. Every experience, every pain, every moment of doubt led me to where I am now. It taught me valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the importance of being true to oneself. Today, at 40, I can say that I'm truly happy. Robert and I have built a life together that surpasses anything I could have imagined. Our relationship is based on mutual respect, trust, and a deep understanding of each other. 2 years ago, we adopted a little girl, Sophie. Being a mother was a dream I had abandoned during my marriage to Jack. But with Robert, I found the courage to pursue it again. Seeing Robert as a father, so loving and dedicated, has added a new dimension to our love. Our life isn't perfect, of course. We still face challenges. The age difference sometimes shows, especially when it comes to raising Sophie. There are times when our perspectives differ due to our different life experiences, but we've learned to see these differences as a strength, not an obstacle. Jack is still part of our lives, albeit in a very different way than I once imagined. Over time, the pain and anger faded, giving way to a cordial relationship. He's even become a sort of uncle to Sophie, something that fills me with a strange mixture of gratitude and nostalgia. A few months ago, we ran into Jack at the park. He was with his new girlfriend, a lovely woman who seems to make him truly happy. As we watched Sophie play on the swings, Jack approached me and said something I'll never forget. "Emily, I know our story didn't end as we expected, but I want you to know that I'm grateful. Grateful for the years we shared, for the lessons we learned together, and yes, even for how it all ended. Because it led us to where we are now, and I think we're both where we're supposed to be." His words moved me deeply. I realized that, despite all the pain and confusion, our experiences had led us to a place of understanding and forgiveness that I never would have thought possible. That night, as Robert and I put Sophie to bed, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey my life has been. From the naive young woman who married at 20, to the hurt and confused woman who fell in love with her husband's father, to the person I am today, a strong, self-assured, and deeply loved woman. I looked at Robert, with a bit more grey hair, but with the same warm eyes that captivated me years ago, and felt a wave of love and gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing my thoughtful gaze. "About us," I replied. "About everything we've been through to get here." Robert took my hand and kissed it softly. "Every moment was worth it," he said, "because it brought us here, to this moment, with you and Sophie." And he was right. Every tear shed, every moment of doubt, every obstacle overcome had led us to this point, to a life full of love, respect, and genuine happiness. My story is a testament that love can emerge in the most unexpected places, that happiness sometimes requires making difficult decisions, and that forgiveness, both of others and of oneself, is the path to true freedom. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I know that, whatever happens, I'll face every challenge with the strength and wisdom I've gained throughout this journey. And I'll do it with Robert by my side, with Sophie in our hearts, and with the certainty that, despite all the twists and turns, I've found my true home. As I write these words, I feel a deep peace. My life hasn't been easy, and it certainly hasn't followed the path I once imagined. But every experience, every decision, has shaped me into the person I am today, a person I'm proud of. Sometimes, when I look at Robert sleeping beside me, or when I see Sophie laugh as she plays in the garden, I feel a wave of emotion so intense it leaves me breathless. It's in those moments that I realise that everything, the pain, the confusion, the tears, was worth it. Because it led me here, to this moment, to this life that, although imperfect, is profoundly beautiful in its authenticity. And so, as I close this chapter of my story, I find myself excited for what's to come. Because if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that life always has surprises in store. And I'm ready to face them all, with love in my heart and hope in my eyes. This is my story, a story of love, betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption. A story that reminds me every day that true love, love that sees you for who you really are, love that challenges you to be your best version is possible, and that sometimes you find it in the most unexpected place.